Welcome back, everyone. It's the start of OP12, and we're back for another tier list Thursday. At least I think it's probably Thursday when I'm uploading this. Just like usual, I'm going to talk about all the new decks, along with all the structure decks, and just some of the more meta relevant leaders that I think will be good. So, obviously, the big bad, right? This deck is obviously really, really strong. It can starve, it can go aggressive, it's just very versatile. And I don't think there's any questions, right? Nami. The problem with Nami, I think, is that we don't have the Whitebeard and Ace structure deck, but I do think this deck is very strong. You have a pretty good matchup against a lot of the aggro decks that's aiming to beat Snake Man, and you have like a lot of tools to beat Snake Man. Like if you're going second on that 2-don turn, you can play like Hiyori and put a Kikunojo into life. Which means that like as long as you play the Hiyori, this deck will not want to swing at you because they know you've put probably a Kikunojo into life. And obviously being 7k, this Luffy always needs a Dawn to swing at you, and you have a very good matchup into the like the Zoro and Battle Betty and all that jazz. Karakuri, this leader is very interesting. I don't think this leader is very good. Main problem is that you need a lot for this leader to actually come online. But I think you actually have an okay matchup into GP Luffy, purely because of the 10 drop. But it's very strong once you get it online. You know, I'm struggling to see a reason why you would play this deck over the likes of this. You're not really ramping as fast, um, because you're dominating every turn and you need multiples of that pudding. Of course, you're 6k when attacking, which does matter. I think the main problem is by the time you get to drop your first 10 drop, this deck already have like an 8 and a 9, even if they don't have Sanji. And once you play your 10, it rushes. Sure, maybe like they block Giant 1k or like they take the life. Um, and if it gets Red Rock, the next turn, just in such a bad spot. Kobe, this leader is kind of good, I guess. Um, you're beating a lot of the decks that aims to beat this, but you're just nowhere near as efficient as like some of the other decks, you know. And it's like almost always an auto lose against blue purple. Um, but I think you're quite strong against the likes of Zoro, the likes of Betty. Well, you you could still lose to Betty just to the fact that you're 4 life. But like in a lot of the control versus control matchups, this deck will just come out on top because they cannot remove your things and you can remove theirs, right? It's very interesting that being a black deck, the main form of removal for this deck is to just swing into things really big and reduce power. You're not using a lot of the really strong black tools. Like, yeah, it's really weird. Hirohoshi, this deck is bad with a capital B. This deck is bad. This Jinbei leader, this Jinbei leader is bad. I don't think, but I think the cards for these decks are very good. I don't think these are the premier decks. I'll come when it comes to, I'll talk about it. But I do think Holy Jones is actually okay. Where is it? This leader here. I think it's okay. I'll talk about it more once we get to it. Um, yeah, this leader is fun. This is really fun to play. I've tried it, but I just don't think it's very good. And Jinmei, again, I just don't think. I think there are better options if you want to play a mono green Fishman leader. All right, let's get to the structure decks. I'll start with what I perceive to be the worst one, Yamato. Um, the cards for this deck just feels a little. It's always missing something. Um, Despite being an aggressive deck, I think into blue purple, you're still not that strong. Even though you are double attacking, it still takes 3 hits to kill them, even if there are 3 life. Plus, they can heal. This deck gets way worse in the decks that can heal. Plus, once that 8 cost Karakuri hits the board, yeah, it's just so much value, and your leader just doesn't do enough. Obviously, the structure deck stuff is very strong and very good. But into this meta, I just don't think this is the right meta for it. And let's see. Probably Shanks. I think Shanks, despite the structure deck, I don't think it's very good. It's not really what Shanks wants to be doing. Um, how Shanks wants to be this deck is by just hit face. When you can hit face, don't swing board, and sometimes you can just kill them straight away. That 10 drop Rush Shanks is very impactful. Um, because it minus 1,000 to board, it's like an immediate red rock target. If that gets us on board for 2 turns, you've probably won. Same with Goldie Roger. Um, Alternatively, I think this deck is actually okay against like the likes of Lucci. I think you're quite good in this decks like Bell Bay. Zoro can be a little bit of struggle, depending on how you build it. But obviously that new Shanks, the 9 cost Shanks, I don't personally I wouldn't play it. But I do think it's a pretty good card if the meta requires it. I just don't think it's the meta for at the moment. You still have a pretty good matchup into green purple and blue purple as well because you can remove Sanji Pudding with Mulgun. You can Divine Departure the E-cost category as well. So I think this deck is actually in a very good spot still. Also, this is like very much a deck that's very easy to play and that a lot of players will be on, just because of how easy it is. If you sometimes you just curve your opponent and win. Bonnie, I think the structure deck doesn't really help this deck. I'll be honest, but the thing with Bonnie is that because you're green, you're just going to be automatically good into a lot of the decks, right? But one of your worst matchups is still going to be Rob Lucci, which is going to be a big mainstay of this format. Um, that new 10 drop feels really weird against green purple because so I guess you have options because sometimes um that 10 cost off he just doesn't do anything because of that E cost category blocker just restanding everything every turn. Blackbeard, probably like here. I think the problem with Blackbeard is that you have a very unwinnable matchup against this deck and the green purple deck. I'll just put this here. Um, if blue purple just starves you and just drags the game out long enough, you kind of just lose. Um, like early game, I think the best thing you can do if you don't have like if you're not playing Harridan, the 6 cost, is probably just put everything on your leader and swing. Like I guess play Burgess is okay. Um, but like if you want to be trying to play for board removal, you're like getting hard punished by cards like Gravity Blade, Red Rock, and God Thread, which kind of just messes up your day. Green purple, I think this deck has a good matchup in a lot of the meta. Obviously, like decks like Bonnie and Smoker is kind of rough, but you have a personally when I play blue purple, the decks I don't want to see is this and green yellow law. Everything else I think is somewhat winnable, even Bellow Bay. Um, this deck is a problem. Every card in this deck replaces itself, so it's an aggro deck that you find very hard to starve. I'm thinking about playing like 9 cost Mihawk in this deck just to remove like a Luffy Taro or a Sanji Pudding. Also has like other uses. It can remove a Ben Beckman. It can remove like 7 cost Law, which is also a problematic card. Uh, the other two structure decks are the good ones. Unfortunately, this structure deck is probably this one of the best ones, but I just don't quite think that this deck has its legs. Obviously, this deck did get one win in that big championship against Blue Purple, but the problem with that matchup is that Blue Purple didn't see ramp. Basically, like this deck saw nothing and this deck saw everything, right? Obviously, Nika is sometimes enough to win games, but I just don't think this deck is good enough. Even though the structure deck support is really, really strong, um, you're still very weak in the Shanks, you're still very weak in the Lucci, and you're very weak in the Blackbeard as well. Buggy. Buggy. Not gonna lie, the structure deck is insane. That new E cost is everything that this deck is missing. Along with like a lot of these 4 costs that become 5 costs. Um, and this deck kind of struggles by removing stuff as well. But once you stick like a 7 cost or 8 cost, it's basically here to stay. Sometimes when you play a body, you can just get god threaded and on curve, which can be rough. Not if you have that E cost on field, right? That E cost is everything that this deck wants to do. Being able to consistently produce the big 10 cost buggy on curve is just way too strong. I'm very excited to see how this deck does. Yeah, I hope this deck does well. It's obviously a lot of the on the sim. OP11 is not out yet for us Western players, and none of the new structure deck stuff is in, so it's been kind of hard to try to test these things. It's just all theory. But yeah, theoretically, I think this will be very good. Solves like your Shanks matchup a little bit. Sometimes you just get -3 mansion popped and your whole board is gone. Bonnie is still very rough for your deck. You know, Lucci is not as bad anymore. But we'll just have to see. Decks that remove based on power, like Kobe, even Shanks, have an easier time just because they can just swing into it and remove it. Decks that care about cost, like UP, Blackbeard, Lucci, will have a hard time removing bodies off this board. Yeah, that's all the structure deck leaders. We'll start from OP1 then. Just obviously a lot of aggro decks. Doflamingo. I don't think this deck is gone. Obviously, with the rise of Buggy, this deck is way worse, right? And I'd probably put this deck like here. I think the time for this deck is kind of gone now. Um, you're not almost an instant win into Bell Betty anymore either. Um, Even decks like Lucci, I think you're gonna beat because of the way Lucci is built at the moment. With the Tenzans, it's just a lot more bricks in general. Um, but there's a reason that this deck is not being played anymore. Decks like Green Purple just completely outshine it. As an aggro deck without Jinbei, I don't think you can beat this either because 1/9 is just game losing for you. That E-cost Katakuri blocker is very hard to remove as well. Yeah, I think the time is gone, but you can still try to catch a lot of the aggro decks off guard, right? That 4-cost law is still very crippling for decks like Zoro and decks like Betty. Right. Speaking of Zoro, I probably put Zoro like here. I think I'm gonna move Bonnie down. Yeah. There's a big argument. I don't quite know if Zoro is gonna be. I don't think this deck actually beats blue purple. It's like maybe like a 50-50 at best. Because they just don't have to hit you. I'm being 6K and having like upwards of 9 counter events. It's just way too strong. And yeah, this deck. Why play this deck when you can play green purple, which functionally does the same thing but with bigger bodies and more resources? You know, um, the added bonus is that you have a good matchup in the green purple, but there are better decks, I think. Red green law. Um, I think this deck is still a very pilot dependent. Um, but again, I think there's better alternatives than this deck. Like green yellow law, which I think is very good. Um, but the reason, no real reason to play this deck, to be honest. Obviously, if you're a very good pilot, I think you have a good matchup into blue purple. Um, Also, I'm hearing from a good friend of mine that in that Shank structure deck, there's that 1-cost Luffy, which is the 1-cost Supernova, which is red, which we don't have in the game yet, apparently, and apparently it's a big deal. It's a target that you can restand with that restand law, and it's a target that you can buff with Makino. Uh, Maybe that comes up and this deck becomes super insane, but we're gonna have to see. I'm not very believing in this deck at the moment, unless someone shows me otherwise. Newgate. In EB, I would have put this deck like here, you know, but right now it's probably gonna have to be here. This deck is very scary for green purple because sometimes early game just have counter and then they drop a Roger on you and you die. But against green purple, you have access to red rock. You can heal. You have access to 4-cost pudding, which just ruins this leader completely. You yourself are a 6k, so you don't need this Dawn Advisement to swing into them. And yeah, this leader's had its time to shine in the previous format. In this next coming format, not the greatest. Plus, you lose just a lot of the aggro decks as well. Arlong. Okay. The problem with this deck is mainly that you run out of steam if they don't swing at you. Um, that 3 cost, I think it's 3 cost Arlong from EBO2 is obviously very good. Um, is it good enough to push this deck into regional winning? Probably not. Um, Obviously, you have access to Hody Jones, which is very strong, but against some of these other meta leaders, you just fall so short. Blue Nami, um, mm, probably like here. Um, the problem is a lot of decks just ramp way too fast. These two decks are way too aggressive for Nami, and there's a better Nami now, so a lot of Nami players will probably be playing this. Um, and then if you want to play the blocker build, there's just too many Hachis in the format, so this deck's kind of hard. Bad in the Blackbeard, bad in the Buggy, bad in the Dofi, bad in the Disnami, purely because 4 cost pudding. You know, the fact that that card exists just makes you play the game so weirdly. Category yellow category. If in like the very first week, so in 2 weeks, 2 weekends coming, there's like 3 regionals for this set for us in Europe. I think this deck is here. In about 2 months, or like in about a month's time, I'd probably put this deck here. Here. This deck is very strong at a starter format. In fact, like I could even put it here. Um, but realistically, I think it's here. This is one of those decks that into unknown meta is going to be very good because people just probably don't have the best testing against it. Even against decks like Zoro and Betty, you can still win if you play like a very defensive build because 10 cost Big Mom is just sometimes enough to push you over the edge. Rebecca, it's not really the meta for this deck at the moment. You struggle against, you do okay into some of the aggro decks, but against like a lot of them, if you don't open a Coliseum, with against Bello Betty, sometimes you just die. You just die like a dog, because you can't fight back. You just have sometimes you just look at the searches like, oh, I can't do anything about this. Also, this deck hits big guys, and this deck puts up a lot of big guys. But you have a decent matchup in the green purple, which is something. Queen. I have been playing this deck, and I do really like this deck. If I'm being honest, I don't think people are going to be playing it, which is the only problem. If people actually give this deck a try, I'd probably put it here. I think this deck is way better than the Lexic Katakuri and all that. Yeah, I'd probably put this deck here if people actually played it. But unfortunately, like I don't think people are going to be really on it. This deck is way too hard for its own good. Also, another thing, I thought Snake Man was going to be a very easy deck when I first got in. Turns out this deck has a lot of micro decisions that actually matter, just like Queen, and sometimes one bad decision can just ruin your day. So this deck's a lot more difficult than I originally thought. I thought it was one of those decks that I can just pick up and play, but you need to have a lot of matchup knowledge because so much of the meta is just targeted towards you. Anyway, back to Queen, right? I think that 8-cost Sneak Man is such a good card for this deck. Like, it is insane. If this leader puts up any result, it'll be because of that. You can just randomly leader effect out of nowhere. If you have like 6 cards in hand, you drop that, you ditch one. If you're on 0 life, you can still heal, which solves so much problems with just bricking in general. You have that 5-cost Nami blocker, amazing blocker. It's just such a custom card for like any yellow deck or any blue or yellow deck, I guess. It can stack your deck for Sanji next turn. It can bottom deck your bricks, search for your red rock. You have one cost carrot stacker as well. It's a Perona, look at top three, that doubles down to trash itself and make itself a 1k. It's absolutely everything that this deck needs. I'm super excited to be playing this. Probably after the first set of regionals in that weekend, I'll probably be playing a lot of Queen, and very excited for this leader. I think it's going to be very good. Bello Bay. Yeah, I don't want to say much about this leader. I hope Bungie can keep it in check. Absolutely despise this deck. I tried it, can't play it. um, I, I really there's something about this deck just I absolutely despise. Is like the games just end way too short. Like I've tried playing it. You play it at locals. You finish your game in 5 minutes and you sit around for 20 or like 30 minutes. But it is very strong, right? You have very good matchups into both these leaders. You have a very good matchup in the Shanks, crippling against Buggy, bad against this, bad against this, bad against this. It's just such a high roll deck, and I guess if you can win all your dice rolls against these decks, you win. But I actually find that playing I've been playing a lot of green purple and blue purple. When I play against Bello Bay, I'm not as scared as I am playing against some of the other anti decks like this. When I play this deck, the deck I don't want to see is Green Yellow Law, number one. That deck is absolutely miserable to play against sometimes, especially with that new badge blocker. I absolutely do not want to be playing against green purples. A good green purple will just absolutely mess you up. And yeah, you can't both these decks. You want to be starting, but it's so hard to start both of these decks. If you have a bad hand, sometimes Betty just kills you. If you draw God right on curve, congratulations, you've won the game. Yeah, matchups like that, I just not a big fan of. All right, OP5 leaders. Purple Luffy, probably here. The build without Luffy Taro, I think, is kind of bad. I'll be honest. I've played against builds without Luffy Taro that just aims to play Katakuri and 9 cost Luffy. I don't really agree with that, to be honest. I think the build with Luffy Taro is a lot scarier, which is another reason why I think this deck could be playing, the likes of 9 cost Mihawk. And yeah, the build of Luffy Taro just generates you so much value with that Sanji, but uh, the the other build is a lot stronger, but it's so less consistent, right? You need to see one Ram card, which is ideally Bon Clay. Everything else is so much worse, and you need to draw an 8-drop, which is Katakuri. If you don't draw a Katakuri that turn, if you play like 7 cost Sanji, the game basically ends and you lose. You know, and I think if you play a build with searchers and you just play the 4-7-9 curve still, but instead of Linlin, you're playing the Katakuri. I think it's a lot better. And I think you're still terrible against Bello Bay. So all the Luffy leaders just terrible against Bello Bay, which is absolutely hilarious. All right, NL. Um, Honestly, mm, I'm trying to think. I have a deck list envisioned, and obviously you're very good into some of these decks. But I don't think this deck is better than Queen. Honestly, probably here. Yeah, probably here. I think the obviously you have a very good matchup in the green purple. You have a very good matchup in the Bell Bay. These these two decks that ramp, you just lose. Preview you can sometimes win. It's not as bad as it is before the way the NL deck is built. Um, but with no Rygo, it's kind of hard. You need triggers, you need life saving triggers to win. And you do beat a lot of these aggro decks that are out to get blue purple. But if I'm having a look, right, this is losing, this is winning, this is winning, this is losing, 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 this is winning. And it's just way too many losing matchups for this deck to perform very well. Plus, with the addition of where are you with this deck? Yeah, I'll put this here probably. With the addition of this is like one of your unwinnable matchups. I just like personally, unless you're playing like multiple of the 7 NL, you're not winning this matchup. Even if you are, sometimes you still lose this matchup. And I just think there's way too many losing matchups. Like if you want to play a Star of Yellow deck, I think Queen is the way to go. Honestly, I don't think this leader is the right format for it. Obviously, this leader has got more tops. It's one of those decks that at the moment with no Rago. With Rago before, you kind of have like a lot of decisions of what you should be playing every turn. Um, your Rago turn sometimes is a little awkward. But now without it, there's not much skill expression in the deck. You're just playing big things and beating over things, which is like I love this deck to bits, but yeah, not the right format for it, unfortunately. Unless like the meta strictly becomes just this, and like something else. Also, there's another yellow deck that I think is a lot better than these. Other than Nami, and we'll talk about it later. That is just way better. Right, Uta. Probably here. Actually, Arlong is like way too high, right? The thing with Uta is like I think obviously you got a very big buff from that structure deck. That 9 cost strike is very good. You need to be defensive. The problem is I actually don't know if that's film, but a lot of the problems with red purple Uta is that you're a 4 life leader. Um, I think you could do okay against this. You're almost always guaranteed triple ramp going first. You ramp twice from leader effect and just anything on 4, whether that be an Ainz or Bon Clay, right? And I think that's being able to triple ramp is very strong. That means you keep up with the curve. You have access to Shanks, but your defensive capabilities is just way too low. And yeah, Giltazoro is good, but I think the body for Giltazoro is kind of small. If that was like a 7K, I'd be like, yeah, this deck is absolute nuts. Um, but the other thing of note is that with your leader effect, you can almost always kill the 8 cost Katakuri if you have Rayleigh in hand. Also, you can pop anything in the game with 10 cost Shanks with your leader effect, but you neg a lot of hand advantage. Right, Hody. I think this is the best Fishman leader. Being able to just tap down a Dawn, because late game you just don't. Um, you won't be able to swing into the leader anyway. And a lot of the Fishman cards are really, really strong. They're all natural 6K swingers. Um, if like you're threatening lethal, blue purple Luffy cannot play any high end. Same with green purple, whereas like you just rest yourself to rest the Dawn, and then Hody can rest another 2 Dawn, right? That means you need to leave up 4 Dawn on the turn that you're expecting them to go for game, which means you can only really play the Nami blocker, where you can play like Red Rock and do nothing else with your Dawn. I think this leader could do something if enough people tried it. I actually quite believe in this leader. You should try it out and let me know. I think this leader's pretty good. Reiju. I see a lot of Reiju on the Eastern Sim at the moment. I don't really understand it. I'm like 5-0 against this deck with purple blue. Um, I do know like you do have a lot of new cards, but those new cards aren't exactly the greatest. I know people are really excited to play them. Um, but like this could top, of course, right? Um, but I just don't see it winning. Once you get the top cup, people will know how to play against this. Um, ECG is strong, but sometimes like you can kind of semi-starve. If you're used to playing NL, you can kind of play it like the Shanks matchup, where like you're swinging to their leader. Once they counter, just start swinging up board, and then they lose their entire hand. And sometimes this leader can just deck itself out if you're starving them as well, which is like, what are we doing? I think there's way better alternatives. Obviously, that new 7 cost ETG blocker is pretty good. That new Reiju 2K is pretty good, but unfortunately, I don't think this deck is good enough. But a lot of people are playing it. I'll be glad if someone can prove me wrong because I think this is a very sick leader. But yeah, Vegapunk, 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 Vegapunk. This leader is very strong. Um, I think you have a very winning matchup into this, winning matchup into this, winning matchup into this, winning matchup into this, winning matchup into this. And you have a losing matchup into this, losing matchup into this, losing matchup into this, somewhat losing into this, and very winning against this. Problem is you're very dice roll dependent. If you go second, you're probably one of the best decks in the game. If you go first, well, unlucky, you're like 2 turns behind now because you just don't have anything to do on that 2 don. So you're very defensive, which is very nice, but a lot of good players won't just swing into you to give you a free win early. It's kind of like the Bello Bay thing, where like if I'm swinging the Bello Bay and they trigger a body, I lose on the spot. But if they don't, if I swing 2 other lives and they don't, well, I think I can probably race. Actually, I'll probably put this higher. I'll swap these two. Ooh. All right, Marco. I hit this deck as well. Animal Kingdom Marco. He's probably good. You have access to 9+8, which is same as blue purple. I played against this on the sim yesterday. I lost, and I was still playing the animal package. Which is weird. Marco seems like one of those decks that will struggle into blue purple, but turns out you can just remove their bodies very very easily. If they don't play exactly 9 cost Sanji on their first like second 9 don turn, you probably just win the game because you've cleared the board. Being able to stick at a 7 cost Nugget is very strong. Another reason why I think I'm considering playing 9 Hawk in this, you know. But decks like this, yeah. Somehow you have a very good matchup in both of these, but being a 4 life leader, you're kind of weak into these. Yeah, you're also quite weak just to aggro decks in general, but you're out to get both the Luffys, which is something, you know. Current. This deck gets a big buff come the structure deck, so of course it's going here. Yeah. This deck is an absolute menace against decks like this, Every deck that's like an aggro deck will just absolutely fold to you. Actually, I'm probably reading this a little low. Every deck will just absolutely fold to you if you're playing against aggro. Some of these big decks that go wide, you're just hoping that Law and Bep will get you there. 5 cost Kara is a very good card, kind of useless into this. Lucio would just absolutely ruin your day. You'll beat every Bello Bay, no questions asked. You'll beat every green purple Luffy, no questions asked. You have access to Hody Jones, one of the strongest cards in the game in this format, just because he can tap down a Don. But against blue purple, it's still kind of rough, even though you have the 10 drop. In a world where this deck doesn't exist, this would sky up like here, But unfortunately, your blue purple matchup, that Law and Bebel helps, not as much as I would hope. Chopper, this deck's kind of fake, in my opinion. There are better alternatives. I think Zumarco is just better. But sometimes you can just absolutely high roll. This deck is quite strong. That EB02 Chopperman can just like go wide so fast. Also, you have access to the Odyssey Chopper, which can restand. Yeah, unless you're like you just really love the IP of this character, there's no real reason to play it over like some of the other decks. You can get there with this deck if you're lucky. Pudding. I think this is the best yellow deck of this format. This deck is so strong. You have such a good matchup into both of these decks, and you have and even into Lucci and Purple Luffy, and you have such a bad matchup in the Bello Bay. See Bello Bay, lose the game. You're just racing to 10. You go first, you guarantee triple ramp every single time, and you're able to play your 10 cost Big Mom before this deck even gets a body on field. Um, you're playing so many cards. Your leader effect ramp twice, going first. If they don't swing at you, you have access to like Viola, to flip your life face down, and then next turn you just swing again, and then you can play like Brule to take a life, and ramp one you can play like what's it called? Bon Clay to ramp one, Katakuri, flip your life face down, ramp one. This deck is so strong. 10 calls Big Mom, it's insane. If you chain it in this deck just absolutely loses. You know, I think you're very strong against decks like Buggy, decks like Shanks as well. This deck just goes way too fast for any of these. Obviously, you have a new searcher now as well, so you have a total of 12 searchers. Actually, I want to move this up. I think this deck is out. This deck's so good. Lim, I think Lim is actually really fake now as well. There's another outside of NL was your worst matchup before. Now there's another deck on the block that can starve you in this. Yeah, if you don't open one cost limb, the game ends on the spot. If you do open one cost limb, they go face and then you die. Smoker. I think Smoker is kind of like the Bonnie effect, but it's a little worse than Bonnie. In this meta, you want to be a lot more defensive than you are aggressive, just because of all these new aggro decks running around. And I think Bonnie has a better time into Purple Luffy, Pudding. Ooh, actually, I'll put this here, just because of how defensive you are. You can play Hodin, obviously, but um, being one life less and just not having leader effect turns out it matters a lot. You know, I don't think this deck is anywhere near as good as Bonnie. That Banish Smoker is kind of annoying, but the problem is like if you see Bello Bay, you're losing. They're killing you before you get to um, E cost kid every single time, no questions asked. Green Yellow Law. I despise this deck so much. It's probably better than Pudding actually. Um, it's this deck for me when I see it, it's almost always now to lose. Not being able to remove their bodies every time. This deck is also really hard to starve. With blue purple, swing into them feels really bad unless you like putting them. Not swinging into them also feels really bad. This deck naturally wants to go second, in my opinion. Um, but this deck wants to go first. So you're forced to go first. Every time I go first against this, unless I triple ramp, usually like I've lost. You know, um, if you only ramp once and you don't have a category that turn, congratulations, you've lost. Being able to cheat out the 5 cost bonding just to stun one of your Dawn is just super annoying, and you can just absolutely loop it. What you can do is like you can just bounce it back to your hand, play nothing, and then like you just play a Bonnie from hand and just stun another Dawn. Once you see one Bonnie, the game basically over. You can never have a Dawn for Giant if you want to play Sandy or Big Mom. Usopp, again, this deck just loses the things that wants to go big. Even against some of these aggro decks, you're not auto winning. This deck produces a lot of 5 costs, and yeah, you're good at killing 4s. Um, and not a lot. There's not a lot of 4 costs. You have a good matchup with Lucci, but that's about it. Probably like it's not. I mean, it's not as bad as Rebecca, right? Probably like here. You know, against a lot of aggro decks, you can do okay. And yeah, I don't. No reason to play this deck over Lucci anymore. Even though you're blue black, being 4 lives just kind of sucks. Um, not able to remove big things also kind of sucks. Piss Kid. Um, this deck's also kind of fake. Um, if you specifically go first against blue purple and play that 7 cost long curve, sometimes it gets you there. But if you go second, the playing 8 cost kid on 8 just feels a lot worse because you're not swinging that turn. Um, Also, like this deck has so many options. They can swing into you and kill you. They can starve you and then you still lose, right? I actually like starving this deck as UP. And you just run out of resources so fast. You can't restand your characters. Unless you draw like multiple of that 7 cost law, you're kind of just losing the game. All right, into Red Sanji. I actually think this leader is pretty good. I might be coping, but I kind of believe in this, Snooky. Um, this has an answer into these decks. It's not bad. I would urge you guys to try it. Even if it's at locals and you're not bringing it to a big event, I think this leader has legs. It's pretty good. It'll surprise me how well it does against some of these aggro decks as well. Being able to trade in, every card you play just replaces itself, which is like really really strong. It's what you want in these aggro decks that just want to go face. Even decks like Battle Bay has to kind of just swing at your board where they're gonna die, and when they swing a board, you draw a card. It's pretty good. Red Purple Luffy. Um, this deck you're kind of at the mercy of a lot of these decks that are targeting blue purple. You lose to the same things, so you're getting targeted at. But I don't think this deck has a bad matchup in the blue purple. In fact, I think you have a very good matchup in the blue purple. You just happen to lose to everything else, which is the problem. You're blue purple that you can't heal, but you have access to tank off shanks. And I just don't think the tank off shanks is better than the blue event. Unfortunately, even if you have a okay matchup in the blue purple, it's kind of rough out here with a lot of Bell Betties. All these decks, absolute real you. Uta, um, I think Uta can actually do okay, but I'm struggling to see a space in the meta for this leader. You play a lot of bricks, which means you're kind of weak to aggro decks. Um, all your bodies are natural 5k swingers, which means you're kind of weak into both of these. Um, but against like some of these other decks, like against Law, you have backlight. Of course, you have access to 8-cost Kid and Hody, which is kind of green staples, and you draw a lot of cards. But this deck plays Pudding, so yeah, you're at the mercy of like this Lucci deck as well. Seeing Lucci is almost always an instant lose for you. You have an okay, still have a very good matchup against decks like Shanks and Teach like you did before. But the problem is like if you want to develop your board, you don't have Dawn to put on your characters swing 6 every turn. Your leader needs a Dawn every turn, which you're always going to have. And that Kanami needs 2 Dawns to swing for 6 because you need 1 Dawn to attach to it and you need 1 Dawn to search. Um, sometimes against different matchups, if you play against like Purple Luffy or Green Purple Luffy, it's like, oh, sorry, I drew my 1 of Hoodie Jones. Yes, you lose. Yeah, and against like some decks, oh, sorry, drew my 8-cost Kid. Yes, you lose. But yeah, I'm struggling to see a world where you would like play this over Bonnie or Carrot or Smoker or Law. I think there's just better green alternatives. Zoro Sanji. This deck's not bad. Yeah, here. Um, you have 3 6k swings at least every turn, which is very important. Um, you have access to that EBO2 VV, which means you're very defensive. You have access to green, which means you can play Hody Jones. But yeah, also that smoker swing for 7 is a little weird because you can only restand the 7k power, which means into UP it can be like a little weird, right? Being able to swing 7s instead of 8s kind of matter as well. Um, but you can play cards like Pudding still. You can bounce back your Hody with leader effect if needs be, and you can Hody them again. What you can do is that if you have a Hody on field and you swing with it, bounce it back with your leader effect, and they have a Dawn up, they're likely to just use that Dawn, and sometimes you can just use the cards on field to find lethal, which is kind of funky. Um, but out of all the aggro decks, probably one of the worst ones. But yeah, thought I'd include it. I don't actually think this deck's bad. A lot of the problem with these decks that I have on the list is that I don't think there's going to be enough of a dedicated player base to represent these decks. Decks like Pudding, I don't think a lot of people are going to be playing. Markle, not a lot of people are going to be on. Queen, not, like basically No one. You know, I'm gonna look at the tournament results afterwards. I don't think there's gonna be a single queen after in that first week. The one I'm playing at is gonna be Dublin, and I'd be very surprised if there's a single queen in Dublin. Um, what is it? Duro Sanji, I think no one's gonna be playing. Hody Jones, there's not gonna be a single person playing. Chopper, probably no one's playing. Orlong, probably no one's playing. You know, I like Red Sanji. Maybe you'll get like one or two Red Sanjis, but I doubt like any good player is gonna be on it. Um, but a lot of the problem with these is that I don't think there's going to be a dedicated enough player base to represent these decks. But these decks I really believe in. Unfortunately, like I can only be in one playlist, right? I can't play all three, so I can only play one. And I would absolutely love to play Pudding at one of these. Maybe I'll play one of the online treasure cups in America and see, you know. But well, that's it for OP12. If there's anything I've missed, any leaders you think I've underrated, overrated, please let me know. And I'll see you guys in OP13. Or sorry, OP12. Bye.